office in the 2011 Ontario provincial election. I didn't know that. He has appeared frequently in the mainstream media, and that was where I first saw him on Michael Corn's show, and he was always such a great debater, discussing human rights, fundamental freedoms, and gender equality, and he loves to share his passion for science as the host of an astronomy radio show called The Star Spot. So please join me in welcoming Justin Trottier.
Yes, my interests are a little bit eclectic, as you might have gathered from that introduction. I'm going to move this before it gets knocked over. I should say, first of all, I'm a little intimidated following Karen Strawn. I don't know how you speak after her. She was just amazing. We love having her here. So I have a few different things that I'm supposed to cover in about 40 or so minutes. So I'm going to try to get through as much of this as I can, and then I'm really hoping that we can have a discussion afterwards. David asked me to talk about how do you stay positive, which is really one of the core themes for the conference today. And I think it'll dovetail very nicely into the second part of my talk, which is about once you've figured out a positive and thoughtful approach to these issues, what do you do next? And one of the answers to that question I'm going to argue is, well, you found a space, a safe space where people can come together and deal with real issues, and that can make a positive difference in the lives of families. But I'm going to start by sharing with you some unfortunate stories, and I'm doing that for a reason, so I hope that you'll bear with me. But I want to start off by telling you a little bit about the week that I had and that Cafe as an organization had. So I'm going to go through with you the last 7 days of my life. Last week, a few of us, actually some of the people in this room, and I were at a street festival called the Cabbagetown Festival, which is actually in the very neighborhood where the Centre for Men and Families is located. And we thought this would be a great opportunity to let the community know about the programs that we were doing. And we had some really, really great conversations, registered some clients into some of the various programs that we do. But I'm going to tell you about some of the unfortunate or negative encounters that we had. So on the Saturday, it was a 2-day conference, on the Saturday, had a man walking by, looking at us from the distance, sort of across the street, and then out of nowhere, spontaneously starts laughing out loud. And I wasn't really sure what to make of this, so he made it very clear by giving me his middle finger. And I knew exactly what he had in mind. He wasn't a fan of ours. He ran off and we just let that one go. That was Saturday. On Sunday, we got into a bit of an encounter, despite my best efforts to avoid it, with a lady who had some trouble with our fathering programs. We run a program called Fathering After Separation or Divorce, which is all about empowering dads, but is really focused on the best interests of children. So she tried to argue, I tried to calm her down. That lasted about 10 minutes or so. It was an excruciatingly long 10 minutes. And I think the highlight was towards the end where she said, well, you know what? Men don't have tits. So that's the end of the story. Mothers are the primary parent, and what you're trying to do is just break that bond between mother and child. And a father really is a secondary parent, if he has any value at all. So that was my Sunday. But otherwise, it was a great experience that weekend. Then on Monday, I get into the office, the Centre for Men and Families where I work, and it was one of the first things that I learned, that there is a protest being planned of today's conference. The justification for the protest, quote, Cafe founders and members have repeatedly voiced their misogynist, racist, and homophobic views. Views ultimately harm women and other gender-oppressed people's safety, as well as the men they claim to represent. So that was Monday. Then on Tuesday, I received a message from a faculty member, one of our Cafe members. He's also on the faculty at University of Toronto. And he was horrified to find that the faculty at U of T, staff and faculty, had been circulated a memo by, and I'm going to avoid naming names in all of these stories, but one of the prominent unions that represent staff at the university. And the memo was to notify staff that the union was taking an official opposition to our activities on campus and would be lobbying the administration at the university to try to have our group disbanded. They've been trying to do this for 3 years now. Best of luck to them. So here's what they said. The reality is that MRAs on campus, and they always label us that way, are not interested in positive activism. Instead, they stalk, harass, and attack feminists, keep women's voices on the margins, and blame women for making men's lives miserable. So that was Tuesday. The week's only half over. On Wednesday, we learned that our request to have a venue booked at the same university for one of our upcoming events was being delayed. No reasons given, but of course I imagine it had something to do with this pronouncement that had come out from this union. On Thursday, we learned that one of our student clubs, we have student clubs forming all across Canada. Again, I'm going to avoid giving any specific information, but one of those clubs was denied ratification for reasons which on further reflection didn't make a lot of sense, and we still need to look into what that's all about. But it happens quite regularly with our student activists. And then on Friday, we got an email from a prominent Ottawa-based violence against women organization putting us on notice that they found this conference objectionable because, quote, our beliefs harm women and include disbelieving and challenging women's experience of violence. And it went on from there. So that's all in a week's work for us at Cafe. And that wasn't an especially problematic week. I mean, that was, I won't say that's average, but we've had several weeks like that over the last couple of years. So given the degree to which elements in our society seem to have set themselves in opposition to our cause, whether through sometimes accidentally misunderstanding our motives, or intentionally in some cases actually fabricating stories, it would be easy to become bitter, cynical, and defeatist. But I don't. And the reason that I'm here today is to share with you some of the tools or tips or lessons that I've learned that I think apply generally. So let me begin to do that by telling you a few other stories. I've told you some very negative and unfortunate stories, so it's only fair that I tell you some good stories. So I'm going to ask that we go to the next slide, and I want you to meet a few of our friends at the Center for Men and Families. This is George. George was a loving husband and father. He had a close relationship with his 5-year-old daughter. But after his marriage ended and he became an every other weekend dad, his relationship with his child began to deteriorate. His daughter, it turned out, was being alienated from George. George finally reached out to us, and we were able to support him. We were able to help him deal with family court issues through the legal clinic that we run. We were able to provide him with counseling and peer support so that he could make sure that he was emotionally stable so that he could fight for his daughter. Let me introduce you now to Chris. Chris had a similar story of alienation from his child, but his had an even happier ending. He became a client of our fathering program, that Fathering After Separation or Divorce program. And through that program and other services that we provide, Chris has been able to reestablish a healthy and a vibrant relationship with his 2 children. The next story I want to show you is a video, and I wonder if I could just play it on my computer, and I'll put my microphone up. And so this is a fellow named Dorian, and Dorian, just to give you some context, suffered childhood abuse, which left him angry and maladjusted and just bitter with the whole world, and he became a user of one of our programs related to mental health. So let's hear just a couple of minutes from Dorian, if this works.
Let's talk a little bit about
You guys hear that okay?
Yeah. Some of the experiences that brought you here. Are you okay to talk a little bit about? I know you've had some issues with your parents.
Yes, so the issues that brought me here are long-standing, and I've probably taken a great part of my life. I'm 41 years old now, and beginning part of my life, my childhood to my adolescence to my teenage years, I was abused, not sexually but physically by my father. And my father comes from like a West Indian military background, so he was kind of like my drill sergeant all my life. And I didn't really have much say in the household. I was basically a soldier. Not to do anything wrong, but my dad's soldier to do his bidding and to do whatever he said. And over the years, I had grown a lot of resentment against my father, and that resentment turned to not only against my father, but against everyone else in my family and against the world. And in turn, it gave me a bad attitude against in my life perspective in general, and to the point that it was affecting my work, my health, and everybody around me. And it came to the point that I had to change my life around because it was affecting my health so much. And if I had not gotten help, I don't know where I would be today, honestly. And I'm forever indebted to you all at the Men's Center.
That was Dory. Anyway, as I said, was dealing with a lot of anger issues from his childhood, and it was not working well for him in his professional life and in his personal life. And he's been seeking various mental health supports from us over the last year. I'm going to play one more, and this one is also quite serious. This is Brad. I'll tell you a bit about Brad in a moment, but let's just hear what he has to say.
Out of the blue, my partner actually
You guys can hear that again? Okay.
just across the front seat and punched me, fracturing my nose in the middle of traffic in the express lanes of Highway 401. And that was less than a year after I'd been married. This happened once when there were people in my home. Friends of mine were downstairs in the basement. I go upstairs because my wife and I were obviously arguing. I go upstairs, I come back downstairs, and I actually had cuts and welts on my face. And I remember making up a story about having fallen into a closet. I remember I went to, the worst incident of domestic violence was one that was witnessed by one of my children. And I was on my way to a 3-day meeting, an offsite, and I was leaving at 7:30, 7:45 in the morning. And by the time I was shaken by the experience, I got chased around the house, chased around the main floor, chased around the dining room table, and I actually had 13 open wounds on my face because my partner had not chosen to use an object. My partner chose to use her fingernails. And every single time, with rare exception, every single time there was domestic abuse against, domestic violence against me, it was always on my face. And sometimes it was a surprise attack, and sometimes it was something I could see coming. I was shaken to the core. I had to drive 2.5 hours and then do an all-day presentation. And I'll never forget, I tried putting makeup on, but the blood kept coming through the makeup. So I took all the makeup on, walked into a meeting with all my peers and other executives of the company I work with, and had to stand at the front of the room and present. Obviously, I was shaken. I was not myself. I was shaken in my boots. I was white. I was probably still in shock. And I had open wounds on my face. Nobody asked any questions.
These videos, by the way, we don't tell them, or we don't put these up on our website to be gratuitous. It's to share stories and to encourage other men to come forward and get the help that, in Brad's case, he got. So how did we help Brad? Well, he became one of the first registrants in Toronto's first, maybe Ontario's first, support group for male victims of domestic abuse, which we started just very recently in the spring. And we had 10 men who were in that first round. It went very well. We just actually started running that program again earlier this month. Brad, in fact, is a good example. He went through that first round of the program. Now he's actually returned and is one of our co-facilitators, helping other guys, sharing his story and being a resource to these other men. So I guess my point is, one of the main ways that I stay positive is that when I'm tempted to engage in fruitless wars of ideology or polarizing online debates over gender politics, instead I reflect on these stories, on the real good that I really believe we're doing in the lives of actual families. And that privileging of people over ideologies is key. It's part of the very statement of values of the organization of CAFE, and it indicates our commitment to make our cause about helping individual people. So we put this eternal debate over which group has it worse, men or women, put that to the side, that's interesting. But if what we're interested in doing ultimately is helping individual people who are suffering and in need of assistance, then that kind of polarizing debate can often be a distraction. And who loses it when that distraction takes over? Well, it's those individual families, men and women both. So I was going to read you just a few of the values of the organization, and I think you'll get a sense for that kind of positivity, which I hope imbues all the work that we do. So number one, we're an open and a diverse community. We embrace all individuals regardless of sex, gender identity, gender expression, sexual orientation, etc. We value equality, tolerance, respect, dignity, diversity, and acceptance. We value all fundamental freedoms. That's very important to us. Freedom of speech, freedom of the press. We oppose censorship in all forms. We value dialogue and peaceful approaches to settling differences. We value the human rights of each and every individual. We believe that men and boys share a common collective interest with women and girls, and that through promoting the health and welfare of any individual, everybody benefits. We value policy that flows from evidence and research, rather than ideology or special interest agendas. we value transparency and accountability. So those are things that we stand for. We don't talk very much about what we stand against, except maybe that censorship. But that, again, that's really about valuing freedom of speech and dialogue and conversation, which I think we've become quite known for. So that's kind of the abstract, the values that we embody, but how does that actually play out in different kinds of contexts or forms? So let me give you a few examples of the approach we take, that positive approach in different sorts of situations. First, the online and social media, which can be one of the toughest environments to stay positive. I can tell you that. My belief is that a back and forth war on Twitter or other social media platforms is a never-ending battle that nobody ever really wins or loses. Everybody wants to get the last word. So my advice there is do not fight fire with fire. Avoid sarcasm. Always bring it back to the themes that I've been sharing, and that is about the people who are actually benefiting from what we're doing. So my push is on inclusion. Equality includes everyone. Talk about that a lot. In fact, that's the motto of CAFE, equality includes everyone. Number two, that there are real people that need support, just as I've been saying. And number three, I point a lot to the company that we keep. And we'll get to examples of that in a while, but I can tell you the partnerships and collaborations that we've been building over the last couple of years, I think will blow some of you away. You won't believe that we're actually making progress working with agencies that at first blush you might have imagined would have been natural opponents. Let me give you a couple of examples from some recent Twitter encounters we've had. Firstly, on the necktie campaign, we had people challenge us as hijacking. Let me step back, you might not know the necktie campaign. So this is an initiative that seeks to expand the inquiry into murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls to also include boys and men. How many of you have heard of the necktie campaign? Okay, that's pretty good, and some of you haven't then. If you haven't, put your hand up. About half of you, okay, so we've got to do a better job communicating that, but you will hear a lot more about that over the course of the conference and beyond. So we were announcing that this campaign was being prepared, and we got some blowback. And so the response that I gave was to point out that the founders of this campaign were actually mothers. Mothers who had sons in the indigenous communities, sons who had been murdered or had gone missing. In fact, the lady that came up with the concept, Lydia Daniels, is a very close ally of our organization and is working with us. So again, we talk about the actual families behind the initiative and the fact that this is an inclusive project and in fact was founded by mothers. Another example is our campaign around domestic violence, the services, the policy work we're doing to try to make our domestic abuse policies inclusive. Not to the exclusion of women, not privileging men, just inclusive of all victims. And we don't only talk about men and women, we also talk about violence in same-sex relationships as well, so it's truly inclusive. But people still question our statistics or our motives or what have you. So we point to conferences that we've done, like the Healing Journeys Conference, which is coming up next month, where we're actually partnering with very credible, very established anti-abuse organizations, which have been doing amazing work and are completely unblemished and praiseworthy organizations. That's the kind of company we're keeping now, and I can give you more examples of that. How do you stay positive when it comes to events, conferences like this, the various lectures that we've become known for, and the mass media? And often they interrelate because the media often covers the events and they don't always do the unbiased job that we would hope that they would. And one of the most frustrating experiences we have is dealing with that kind of double standard and how our events are covered differently from the way in which our critics and the protests and other things that they do are covered. I mean, I want you to imagine if members of CAFE attended an event we disagree with and committed the kind of acts that our opponents routinely use at our events. Bullying and intimidating participants, undertaking dangerous acts like blocking doors so people can't get out if there's an emergency, breaking the law by pulling the fire alarm. I know David and the Ottawa group here know well what that's like. I mean, do you think that we'd be given the same free pass that they get? It's remarkable the willingness of the sanctimonious to engage in tactics characterized by aggression, bullying, and censorship, all the while deploring such approaches as patriarchal. What a classic case of projection, as Karen rightly described it. And maddening of all is that the more energetic our opponents get with all of these nefarious things that they do, the more they're somehow deemed as righteously indignant and hence is deserving of sympathy. this is in fact how it often gets reported, and that is a cause of great aggravation for me, and I'm sure many of you. And how do you stay positive? Well, here's what I say. If our opponents, and sometimes the media, want to hold us to a higher standard, they expect better of us than apparently they do of the feminist protesters, I think that's fine. I say, instead of sinking down to the level of our critics, let's own the moral high ground. Let's set the example and raise the bar for all of those engaging in gender advocacy. Let's show them how to do it. Let's show the public it's possible to discuss even the most sensitive issues with respect and diplomacy, but without compromise or shying away from disagreement. We hosted an event around the outcome of the John Ghomeshi trial, which some of you might have been at that event, some of you might have seen it on YouTube. I think that's a great example of how to do an event like that, and kudos to Robert, the chair of our board, for organizing that. I mean, we had a genuine policy debate on a sensitive topic that nobody else was engaging in to that level of sophistication. So, just again, in terms of events and the protests, and maybe there's one this today, so it might become very relevant very soon. One way to stay positive is, I think, to understand that even the most hostile responses to our activities can actually be turned into opportunities for something positive. And I think cafes become remarkably good at finding creative ways of doing that. We have turned protests, last-minute security fees threatened by universities, and other attacks on our events as opportunities to raise awareness through press releases or to raise funds through well-crafted announcements to our supporters, and always, always staying positive and redirecting people's attention to where it belongs, which is the life and death men's issues that have brought us all here today. So I'm going to ask that we go to the next slide. Okay, so some of you might have seen this, one of my fundraising appeals from a couple of years ago. When we opened the Center for Men and Families, we had a columnist from the Toronto Star named Heather Malik write some rather unflattering things about yours truly and a few other people involved in the opening. So I don't know if you can read that. There was a news conference in Toronto this week to announce the unveiling of a men's rights office. It will be run by a thin, pale, wary-looking male victimhood guy. That doesn't fit on a business card, so I just know a CEO. Maybe these two had bad divorces and can't find girlfriends, referring to me and one of my colleagues. I don't know why men's rights groups exist in North America, or indeed anywhere. Well, you know what I say? I say thank you, Heather Malik, for raising $3,000, because we sent out that email where we quoted, and we provided the link, and we didn't lie or exaggerate, we didn't need to, and we turned it into a fundraising appeal. But here's what I really want to point out. Heather Malik chose a personal attack as a way of demeaning our work to improve the lives of boys, men, and fathers and families. And she's neglected the leadership of women in our movement, by the way. But I'm asking you not to react with anger or frustration. Let's show Heather Malik and the larger public why we exist. And then I go on to talk about the issues and the programs that we're doing and bring it back to that positive message. Not easy to do, but you start to learn that you can have much more of an effect through that kind of positivity than you can by getting angry and hostile and really just playing into the hands of our critics. I was going to also go into some of the partnerships that we've built, but I'm running low on time and I have a little bit to say about building a men's center. So I'll just sort of give you, in a nutshell, we have made alliances with, I mentioned, anti-abuse organizations, multicultural organizations, legal aid organizations, family services, victim services, the police colleges, etc. I name those as examples of agencies that are regularly referring clients to us for the various programs that we do. And so that's the company that we keep. And of course, our advisory board, Janice, and so many others who do amazing work providing expertise in different subject matters and who we count on regularly. So here's a good positive message I often leave people with. The way I see it is that we'll make progress when we understand that gender equality is not a zero-sum game where one gender wins only if the other one loses. The failure to adequately address the health and well-being needs of boys and men profoundly affects everyone, including women. All of us have men in our life who at one time or another have been in desperate need of support. In working to close the existing social service gaps, our families and communities will be more peaceful, healthier, and stronger, and all of us will enjoy the benefits of that. One last slide before I move on to that second topic, and that is to just show you this is a chart of how generally technological innovations work, but I think it also is true about the ideas as innovation concepts. And what it shows is that at a certain point, there's that tipping that happens. We were talking a little bit about that during Karen's Q&A. And you don't need to convince everybody, you don't even really need to convince a majority of people. You need to convince key influence makers. And so we shouldn't get too caught up if we can't win every battle or every war of ideas. If we can start making a difference, if we can prove that we have a formula that's actually making a positive difference in people's lives, we will reach those influence makers. And I mentioned some of those partnerships we're building. That's the idea there, is you can open a few important doors, and then over time the rest will follow if that curve holds true. So now, I know I don't have a lot of time, but I'm going to spend a few moments. This will only take about 5 to 7 minutes, going through the roadmap for how we got our center off the ground in Toronto, and I sort of offer it as one approach. It's worked for us. It's not the only way it can be done, but you know, this is a challenge. It hasn't been easy for groups to make this work. So I think we're onto something, and maybe there's some lessons there. So at this point, I'm going to ask Jamie to just go through some of the slides while I'm talking, and you'll get a sense for what the Center for Men and Families looks like, and what perhaps we can have here in Ottawa. So here's what we did in Toronto. We got together a few years ago now, 4 years ago, a small group of people, only 3 or 4, who shared a real passion for men's issues. We'd come out of other sort of social justice movements, if you allow me to use that expression, but we always thought that there was a missing piece, and that had to do with the perspectives and issues of men and boys. So we started organizing meetings. You can just keep a few seconds and go to the next one. We started hosting meetings, and then we decided to host a few events, and those started small, but they grew over time until we were doing events that had 100, 150 people coming out, professional debates, and other kinds of presentations. And at every opportunity, looking at meeting people that cared about what we were interested in. While those events were happening and over time growing in popularity and in attendance, we also started releasing public policy positions on local, regional, and national policy issues, which started to get us media attention and hence more public interest. We didn't miss any opportunity to meet with people. This is really key. Have as many meetings as you can. Don't pass up any opportunity. Use the positivity, give people the benefit of the doubt, convey professionalism, project an image of where you want to go, not where you are now as an organization. Meet with members of your organization, see what kind of resources and experiences they have that can be used as an asset to what you're trying to build. Meet with university faculty and researchers, as well as administrators. Sometimes they can be friendly. Meet with social service agency staff, healthcare facilities, family service, victim service agencies, as I was describing. Meet with elected officials or government bureaucrats in different ministries that have some connection to our issues, whether it's healthcare, social community services, youth services, the Attorney General's ministry, etc. Meet with leaders in professions that we want to make contacts with, so lawyers, so we can open a legal clinic, social service workers, social workers, so we can do peer support groups, doctors, academics, etc. Organize well. Take good notes at all of your meetings. Keep track of all the various people that you're getting to know so that you can find a way to fit everybody into the movement. Then begin running community services in your neighborhood. This shows proof of concept. It acts as a bit of a needs assessment. It shows that there's actually an audience for the kind of programs that we will eventually scale up to providing more systematically once we have a center. Look for creative partnership opportunities. Work with other agencies. Use their space if you don't have your own. And then once you've got all those building blocks, the people, the potential fundraising opportunities, the truth of the research into gender-based violence or domestic violence, and really picking apart the myths and misconceptions there. So we pointed to his research, but not only his, to many other mainstream researchers as well. And as part of that review, Legal Aid was so impressed with the arguments that we were putting forward that they gave us an entire afternoon session just to talk about the male victim side of things to make sure that didn't get ignored. From that sparked a relationship that we've built with Legal Aid Ontario, and we're now looking at doing workshops for lawyers who are associated with LAO, so that lawyers can do a better job at identifying men who may be in need of additional kinds of services. And I guess the icing on the cake was that we're now accredited to provide legal aid certificates as part of a special program for victims of abuse, which gives them streamlined access to urgent family law support. So as far as I know, we're the first men's focused group to have that to do that. So yeah, so that's on Robert. That's on the amazing team, you know, that we've put together. You know, there are some really stellar people that have become part of this cause from all across the country. You're going to meet them. You've already started meeting them, I'm sure, at this conference. But it's amazing the work people do, and as has been said, almost entirely as volunteers. It's really remarkable. Oh, yes, sir.
Yes, Justin, it's really great to hear your talk this morning and your emphasis on positive thinking, taking a positive approach. I think that needs to be reinforced all the time. I'm in a small community, and one of the people that's hoping to get an informal group going there. And I've gone and created a couple of letters, you know, that I've gotten out to individual people. I realized, boy, it's really challenging to think of how to approach folks. And I walk into places like the local YMCA, which is a big rec center, you know, and of course see in behind the glass there all of the posters for violence against women, and asking for contributions and donations and so on, and special fundraisers that are coming up. So, you know, I'm wondering about approaching those kinds of places, the library, you know, that kind of thing, where again, those brochures are readily at hand, you know. So maybe, is there something coming up later this weekend where we're going to be discussing some of this in more detail? Tomorrow,
I think there will be opportunities for that, informally over lunch, and then some more formal things later in the weekend, which we can talk about.
Yeah, something that I would ask for is, this goes back a while, you'll remember this, it's a 4-pager, and put out, I think, regarding campus issues.
One of our earliest publications on
2014 or something. And it would be very helpful if the rough structure of something like that could go out to people in their smaller communities, and then we could fill in local details, and that way we have something really quite powerful to show, you know, to introduce our issue.
Yeah.
So thank you very much again.
Oh, thank you. That's a great suggestion. The closest thing we have right now are posters, 4 posters on different concept designs around different areas of men's issues, which I think are floating around somewhere. I can make them available later. And that's a template that you can get on our website or by request to me or one of my colleagues. And those can be modified to different locations. They're largely being used for campus advertising, but they're not really, strictly speaking, only for students. So, I mean, they could be used by burgeoning new chapters as well. Just to comment on the first part of your question, again, I think it's giving people the benefit of the doubt. I wouldn't assume just because the libraries or the YMCA only show pamphlets for services for women that means that ideologically those agencies only support services for women. And maybe they've just never been approached by a men's group, and they'd be very happy to, you know, complement what they've got for women with some things for men.
Yeah.
I know you weren't suggesting that, but I think some people, that's the attitude that they immediately jump to, is this doesn't belong here. And of course what happens is then men's groups don't ask, and so pamphlets don't show up, and so that impression you know, continues to be held by other people, and it might be false. So it's worth testing. And I'll give you one example. There's an agency in Brampton called the Brampton Multicultural Center. And I had been doing outreach to a whole bunch of different agencies looking for partners as potential referrals of clients, or in other ways doing programs together of various kinds. And I walked into that agency, and all the literature there was focused on women's issues and issues of ethnic or racial minorities, and those programs were good programs. I'm not criticizing them. But so my gut reaction was, I guess I'm in the wrong place. But I gave them the benefit of the doubt. We talked, we had a couple meetings, and now we're actually going to be doing a men's support group in Brampton, and we're considering that our Peel region outpost. So we're going to be, if you know the GTA, we're going to be providing services to Mississauga, Brampton, and the Peel region, and working with some other agencies in the region as well. But if it wasn't for that change of attitude, that kind of positive approach with that particular agency, then we might never have started down that path. So go in and be positive, and you might be surprised. And if you're not surprised, then well, no harm's really been done. At least you've had a bit of dialogue with someone. Okay, well, I think I'm out of time, but thank you for your questions and your attention.